Millionaire pretends to be a beggar at his own gala. What the bride did changed everything. James Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse office, gazing out at the glittering cityscape below. His reflection stared back at him, impeccably tailored suit, neatly trimmed salt and pepper hair, and eyes that held a mix of determination and uncertainty. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie. "Come in," James called out, turning to face the entrance. The door opened, revealing Alfred, his butler of 20 years. The older man's face was etched with concern as he stepped into the room. "You wanted to see me, sir?" James nodded, gesturing for Alfred to take a seat. As the butler settled into the plush leather chair, James began to pace, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. "Alfred, I've come to a decision about Victoria," James said, his voice low and serious. Alfred's eyebrows rose slightly. "Regarding the engagement, sir?" "Yes," James replied, stopping to face his loyal servant. "I need to know if she truly loves me for who I am, not for my wealth or status." Alfred shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "And how do you propose to determine that, sir?" James' lips curved into a small, determined smile. "I'm going to attend our engagement party in disguise, as a homeless man." The butler's eyes widened in shock. "Sir, with all due respect, that seems rather extreme." "Extreme times call for extreme measures," Alfred, James said, resuming his pacing. "I've had doubts about Victoria's true nature for some time now. This will be the ultimate test." Alfred stood up, his face a mask of concern. "Mr. Blackwood, I must advise against this. The potential for public embarrassment, not to mention the strain on your relationship." James cut him off with a wave of his hand. "I appreciate your concern, Alfred, but my mind is made up. I need to know the truth before I commit to spending the rest of my life with her." A heavy silence fell between them. Alfred's shoulders sagged slightly as he realized the futility of arguing further. "Very well, sir. How may I assist you in this endeavor?" James' expression softened. "I'll need your help to pull this off, Alfred. Can I count on your discretion and support?" The butler straightened his posture, a look of resigned determination crossing his face. "Of course, sir. You have my word." "Thank you, Alfred," James said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "Now, here's what I need you to do." As James outlined his plan, the scene shifted to another part of the mansion. Victoria Sinclair, James' fiancée, was in full party planning mode. Her perfectly manicured nails tapped furiously on her tablet as she barked orders at the event coordinator. "No, no, no," Victoria exclaimed, her voice sharp with irritation. "I specifically said champagne fountains, not chocolate fountains. This is an engagement party, not a children's birthday bash." The coordinator, a young woman named Emily, frantically made notes. "I'm so sorry, Miss Sinclair. I'll correct that right away." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "See that you do. And make sure the caviar is beluga, not that cheap Savruga nonsense." As Emily scurried away, Victoria's personal assistant, Megan, approached cautiously. "Victoria, the florist is on the line. They're having trouble sourcing the black orchids you requested." Victoria's perfectly plucked eyebrows furrowed in annoyance. "Honestly, do I have to do everything myself? Tell them if they can't deliver what I want, I'll find someone who can. This party has to be perfect, Megan. It's my grand entrance into James' world, and I won't have it ruined by incompetent vendors." Megan nodded quickly. "Of course, I'll take care of it right away." As her assistant hurried off, Victoria allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Everything was falling into place. Soon, she'd be the talk of the town, engaged to one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Little did she know that her carefully constructed world was about to be turned upside down. Back in his office, James was finalizing the details of his plan with Alfred. "Sir," Alfred said hesitantly, "have you considered the possibility that this plan might backfire? What if Miss Sinclair passes your test?" James paused, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Then I'll have the reassurance I need, Alfred. But something tells me that won't be the case." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the city, James made one final call. "Hello, is this Mr. Chun? The disguise artist? I have a job for you. It's rather unusual, but I assure you, discretion will be handsomely rewarded." With that call, the wheels were set in motion. James Blackwood, one of the city's wealthiest men, was about to embark on a journey that would change his life forever. As he hung up the phone, he couldn't help but wonder, would his risky plan reveal the truth he sought, or would it cost him everything he held dear? The night of the engagement party arrived, bringing with it a palpable air of excitement and anticipation. Limousines and luxury cars lined up along the winding driveway of the Blackwood mansion, disgorging a stream of glittering guests into the warm summer evening. Victoria stood at the entrance, a vision in a shimmering gold gown that hugged her curves. Her smile was dazzling, but her eyes darted nervously from guest to guest, searching for any sign of James. "Where is he?" she hissed to Megan, who hovered nearby. "He should be here by now." Megan checked her phone for the 100th time. Still no word, Victoria. "Should I try calling him again?" Victoria's smile never faltered as she greeted another couple, air-kissing their cheeks. "No," she said through gritted teeth. "He's probably just running late. He'd better have a good explanation for this." As the foyer filled with the chatter of excited guests, a commotion at the gate caught the attention of the security team. A disheveled man in tattered clothes was attempting to enter the premises. "Sir, this is a private event. I'm going to have to ask you to leave," one of the guards said firmly, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. The shabby-looking individual, who was actually James in disguise, pleaded, "Please, I just need a little help. Isn't this a charity event?" The guard's expression hardened. "No, sir. This is a private engagement party. Now, please leave before we're forced to remove you." James, his heart racing beneath the layers of grime and fake stubble, was about to protest further when he felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see a young woman in a server's uniform looking at him with sympathy. "Come with me," she whispered, glancing furtively at the guards. "I can get you in through the service entrance." Grateful for this unexpected kindness, James followed the server, Sarah, around the side of the mansion. As they slipped through a small door into the bustling kitchen, Sarah pressed a finger to her lips, signaling for James to stay quiet. Meanwhile, in the grand ballroom, Victoria was holding court, basking in the admiration of her guests. "Victoria, darling, this party is simply magnificent," gushed Mrs. Worthington, an influential socialite. "But where's the lucky groom-to-be?" Victoria's laugh tinkled like crystal, masking her growing irritation. "Oh, you know James. Always so dedicated to his work. He'll be along shortly, I'm sure." As she turned away, Victoria's facade cracked for a moment. She grabbed Megan's arm, pulling her close. "Find out where James is right now," she snarled. "This is unacceptable." In the kitchen, Sarah handed James a tray of champagne flutes. "Here, take this. Act like you're supposed to be here, and no one will question you." James nodded gratefully. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough and low. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah's eyes softened. "Because everyone deserves a little kindness, no matter what they look like or where they come from." With those words echoing in his mind, James stepped into the ballroom, his heart pounding. The opulence of the scene before him was staggering, even to someone accustomed to such luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd, their light reflecting off jewels and sequins. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and the sound of affected laughter. As James moved through the crowd, offering champagne, he overheard snippets of conversation that made his stomach churn. "I heard he's worth billions," one woman whispered to her companion. "Victoria's certainly landed herself a big fish." Her friend nodded, sipping her champagne. "She always was ambitious. Remember how she dumped that artist boyfriend of hers the moment she met James?" James moved on, his resolve strengthening with each overheard comment. He approached a group where Victoria stood, holding court. As he offered the tray, Victoria's eyes slid over him with disgust, not even acknowledging his presence. Suddenly, a drunken guest stumbled backwards, knocking into James. The tray tilted, sending a cascade of champagne over James' already shabby clothes. "Watch where you're going, you oaf," the man slurred, laughing as he took in James' soaked appearance. "Oh wait, maybe this is an improvement for you." The group erupted in laughter, Victoria's tinkling giggle rising above the rest. James stood there, dripping and humiliated, as the party continued around him. From across the room, Sarah watched the scene unfold, her face a mixture of sympathy and anger. She started to move towards James, but was intercepted by Victoria. "You," Victoria snapped, her eyes flashing. "Clean up this mess immediately. And get that person out of here. He's ruining the ambience." Sarah bit back a retort, instead nodding meekly. "Yes, Miss Sinclair. Right away." As Sarah hurried to get cleaning supplies, James retreated to a quiet corner, his mind reeling. The cruelty and shallow nature of the guests of Victoria was worse than he had imagined. But the kindness of Sarah had given him hope. Perhaps this test would reveal not just the worst in people, but the best as well. The party continued to swirl around him, a glittering facade hiding ugly truths. And James, hidden in plain sight, watched it all unfold, knowing that soon, very soon, he would turn this world upside down. As the evening wore on, James found himself in an increasingly precarious position. His disguise, while effective, was drawing more negative attention than he had anticipated. He shuffled through the crowd, keeping his head down, ears open to the conversations swirling around him. A group of Victoria's friends huddled near the bar, their voices lowered but still audible to James as he passed by. "Did you see that homeless man?" one woman whispered, her nose wrinkling in disgust. "How did he even get in here?" Her companion, a man in an expensive suit, chuckled. "Probably snuck in looking for free food. Security's getting lax these days." "Well, someone should do something about it," another chimed in. "This is supposed to be an exclusive event, not a soup kitchen." James felt a pang in his chest. These were people he had considered friends, or at least friendly acquaintances. Their true colors were showing, and the picture wasn't pretty. He moved away from the group, only to overhear another conversation that made him pause. "I give it a year tops," a woman in a red dress was saying. "Victoria's ambitious, sure, but can you imagine her actually being faithful to James?" Her friend nodded sagely. "Oh, I know. I heard she's already got her eye on that new tech billionaire. What's his name?" "Ethan something." "Ethan Morris," the first woman supplied. "And you're right. Victoria's always looking for the next big thing. Poor James doesn't stand a chance." James felt his stomach churn. He had suspected Victoria might not be entirely sincere in her affections, but hearing it discussed so casually was another matter entirely. As he pondered this new information, a commotion near the champagne fountain caught his attention. The drunk guest who had spilled wine on him earlier was making a scene, loudly demanding more alcohol. "Come on, where's the good stuff?" he slurred, swaying dangerously close to James. "This party's supposed to be top-notch." Before James could step away, the man lost his balance, sending a full glass of red wine cascading down James' already stained shirt. "Oh, for God's sake," the drunk man laughed, not even attempting to help. "Look at you. You're a walking disaster, mate." A small crowd had gathered, some looking on with pity, others barely concealing their amusement. James stood there, dripping and humiliated, as the drunk man continued to laugh. "Hey, maybe this is an improvement for you, eh?" the man guffawed. "Probably the closest thing to a bath you've had in weeks." The crowd's laughter grew louder, and James felt his face burning with a mixture of shame and anger. He was about to break character and reveal himself when a familiar voice cut through the noise. "That's enough." It was Sarah, the kind waitress from earlier. She pushed through the crowd, a towel in hand. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked James, genuine concern in her eyes. The drunk man sneered at Sarah. "Oh, come on, love. We're just having a bit of fun with the local riffraff." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "He's a human being, not your personal entertainment. Now, if you'll excuse us." She gently led James away from the crowd, toward a quiet corner of the room. "I'm so sorry about that," she said softly, handing him the towel. "Some people can be so cruel." James nodded, unable to speak for fear of breaking his disguise. Sarah's kindness was a stark contrast to the behavior of the other guests, and it touched him deeply. As Sarah helped James clean up, they both froze at the sound of Victoria's voice nearby. She was speaking to a small group of admirers, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "Oh, darlings, you're too kind," Victoria giggled, holding up her left hand to show off her enormous engagement ring. "Isn't it just divine? James certainly knows how to treat a girl right." One of the women gasped appreciatively. "It's stunning, Victoria. You must be so happy." Victoria's smile widened, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling. Though I must say, I had hoped for something a little more unique. Perhaps for the wedding, James will really pull out all the stops." James felt his heart sink. Even the ring he had carefully chosen, believing it to be perfect for Victoria, wasn't good enough for her. Sarah, noticing James' reaction, placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Don't listen to them," she said softly. "Some people will never be satisfied, no matter how much they have." As James nodded in agreement, Victoria's voice rose again, this time with a sharp edge. "Excuse me," she called out, her eyes fixed on James and Sarah. "What exactly is going on here? This is an engagement party, not a charity event." Sarah straightened up, ready to defend James, but he gently shook his head. This was his test, his moment of truth. Taking a deep breath, James shuffled forward, preparing to confront Victoria directly. The room seemed to hold its breath as the shabby, wine-stained figure approached the glittering hostess. The stark contrast between them was almost comical, the epitome of wealth and privilege face to face with apparent poverty and desperation. Little did anyone know, this confrontation was about to change everything. The opulent ballroom fell into an uneasy silence as James, still disguised as a bedraggled beggar, approached Victoria. The contrast between them couldn't have been more stark, she resplendent in her designer gown and dripping with jewels, and he, reeking of spilled wine and looking like he'd crawled out of a gutter. Victoria's perfect nose wrinkled in disgust as James drew near. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "but I don't believe you were invited to this event." James, his heart pounding beneath his ragged clothes, spoke in a gravelly voice. "Please, miss. I just need a moment of your time." The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably, some averting their eyes, others watching with morbid fascination. Victoria's cheeks flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Time?" she hissed. "You want my time? Do you have any idea who I am or what this event is?" James nodded slowly. "Yes, miss. It's your engagement party. I heard people talking." Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Then you should know that this is a private celebration. How dare you crash my party and ruin my special night?" From the corner of his eye, James could see several guests pulling out their phones, no doubt recording the confrontation. He steeled himself, knowing that what happened next would be crucial. "I'm sorry," James said, his voice thick with feigned emotion. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I saw all this wealth, all this food and drink. I thought maybe there might be a little kindness to spare for someone less fortunate." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed pity, others disgust, and a few, including Sarah's, showed genuine concern. Victoria, however, was unmoved. "Kindness?" she scoffed. "You want kindness? Here's some kindness for you, leave now, and I won't have security throw you out." James took a deep breath, preparing for his final push. "Please," he said, reaching out a dirty hand towards Victoria. "Just a little help. Anything you can spare." Victoria recoiled as if she'd been burned. "Don't touch me," she shrieked. "How dare you? Do you know how much this dress costs?" The room held its collective breath as Victoria's face contorted with rage. What happened next shocked even James, who thought he had prepared himself for the worst. With a violent shove, Victoria pushed James hard, sending him stumbling backward. He lost his balance, crashing into a nearby table laden with hors d'oeuvres. The table toppled, and James fell hard on the marble floor, food and broken glass scattering around him. Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Sarah rushed forward to help, but was held back by another server. Victoria stood over James, her chest heaving with anger. "That's what you get for ruining my night," she spat. "Security! Remove this filth from my sight." As two burly security guards moved towards James, he slowly began to rise. The room watched in stunned silence as he straightened up, his demeanor suddenly changing. "That won't be necessary," James said, his voice no longer rough but clear and commanding. Victoria froze, her eyes widening in shock as she recognized the voice. "James!" she whispered, disbelief etched across her face. Slowly, deliberately, James began to remove his disguise. He peeled off the fake beard, wiped away the dirt from his face, and ran a hand through his hair, revealing his true identity to the astonished crowd. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Phones were raised higher, capturing every moment of the incredible revelation. "James!" Victoria repeated, her voice trembling. What is this? What's going on?" James looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "This, Victoria, was a test. A test of character, of kindness, of the very values I thought we shared." He turned to address the stunned crowd. "I came here tonight disguised as someone less fortunate, hoping to see the best in people. Instead, I've seen pettiness, cruelty, and a shocking lack of compassion." Victoria's face had drained of all color. "James E. I can explain. I didn't know it was you. I thought, that's precisely the point, Victoria," James cut her off. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic human dignity." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of their friends and acquaintances, many of whom now looked ashamed. "I've learned a valuable lesson tonight," James continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. "I've seen who people truly are when they think no one of consequence is watching. And I've seen enough." Turning back to Victoria, whose eyes were now brimming with tears, James delivered the final blow. "Victoria, I'm afraid I can't marry someone who values status and appearance over kindness and compassion. The engagement is off." The room erupted into chaos. Victoria let out a strangled sob, reaching for James, but he stepped away. Guests began talking all at once, the news spreading like wildfire through the crowd. In the midst of the commotion, James felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see Sarah, the kind waitress, looking up at him with a mix of awe and understanding. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. James managed a small smile. "I will be," he replied. "Thank you for your kindness tonight. It meant more than you know." As the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in, James knew that his life would never be the same. But as he looked at the chaos around him, he felt a sense of relief. The truth, as painful as it was, had finally come to light. The ballroom, once a scene of glittering celebration, had descended into chaos. The revelation of James' true identity had sent shockwaves through the crowd, leaving guests stunned and confused. In the center of it all stood James, his shabby disguise now partially removed, facing a pale and trembling Victoria. "James," Victoria pleaded, her voice barely above a whisper, "please let me explain. This isn't what it looks like." James held up a hand, silencing her. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. Slowly, he began to remove the remaining elements of his disguise, wiping away the last traces of dirt from his face and smoothing back his disheveled hair. As he transformed before their eyes, gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised higher, capturing every moment of this incredible scene. "Ladies and gentlemen," James began, his voice clear and strong, cutting through the chaos, "I owe you all an explanation." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on James. "Tonight, I came to my own engagement party in disguise, hoping to see the true nature of those around me. I wanted to believe that the people I called friends, that the woman I intended to marry, would show kindness and compassion to someone less fortunate." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of guests who had mocked and shunned him earlier. Instead, what I witnessed was cruelty, disdain, and a shocking lack of basic human decency. With a few notable exceptions, he nodded toward Sarah, who stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, I saw the ugly truth behind the beautiful facades. Victoria, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly sprang to life. "James, darling, you can't be serious. This was all just a misunderstanding. If I had known it was you." "That's precisely the point, Victoria," James cut her off, his voice tinged with disappointment. "You shouldn't need to know someone's identity or status to treat them with kindness." He turned back to address the crowd, many of whom now looked deeply uncomfortable. "I've spent years building my fortune, believing that it would bring me happiness and surround me with genuine people. Tonight has shown me how wrong I was." A man from the crowd, one who had laughed at James earlier, stepped forward. "Come on, James, old boy. It was just a bit of fun. No harm meant, really." James fixed him with a stern look. "No harm? Tell me, would you consider it harmless if you were on the receiving end of such fun? If you were desperate and alone, and people laughed at your misfortune?" The man stepped back, properly chastised. James continued, his voice growing stronger. "We live in a world where we're quick to judge, quick to dismiss those we deem beneath us. But tonight has shown me that true worth isn't measured by the size of one's bank account or the label on one's clothes." He paused, his gaze falling on Sarah. "It's measured by the kindness in one's heart, by the compassion we show to others, especially when we think no one is watching." Victoria, sensing she was losing control of the situation, made one last desperate attempt. "James, please," she said, reaching for his hand. "I love you. We can work through this. I'll do better, I promise." James gently but firmly removed his hand from her grasp. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but I can't unhear what I've heard or unsee what I've seen. The woman I fell in love with, the woman I thought you were, doesn't exist." Tears began to stream down Victoria's face as the reality of the situation sank in. James addressed the crowd one final time. "I came here tonight hoping to confirm that I was making the right choice in my life partner. Instead, I've realized that I need to reevaluate everything, my choices, my friendships, and my priorities." He took a deep breath before delivering his final blow. "And so, it is with a heavy heart but clear conscience that I announce, the engagement is off." The room erupted into chaos once more. Victoria let out a strangled sob, collapsing into the arms of her nearest friend. Guests began talking all at once, the news spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Amidst the commotion, James felt a gentle touch on his arm. He turned to see Sarah looking up at him with a mix of admiration and concern. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. James managed a small, grateful smile. "I will be," he replied. "Thank you for your kindness tonight. It meant more than you could know." As the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in, James knew that his life would never be the same. The carefully constructed world he had built was crumbling around him, but as he looked at the chaos surrounding him, he felt a strange sense of liberation. He had set out to test others, but in the end, he had learned the most important lesson himself. As he made his way through the stunned crowd towards the exit, James realized that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. A chance to rebuild his life on a foundation of genuine connections and true values. The night air hit him as he stepped outside, cool and refreshing against his skin. For the first time in years, James Blackwood felt truly free. The road ahead was uncertain, but he was ready to face it with new eyes and an open heart. The grand ballroom, which had been buzzing with excitement and laughter just hours ago, now stood eerily silent. Shards of broken glass crunched under James' feet as he made his way through the debris of what should have been the happiest night of his life. The remnants of the lavish engagement party lay scattered around him, a fitting metaphor for his shattered relationship. James found himself in his study, a sanctuary of rich mahogany and leather-bound books. He poured himself a generous measure of scotch, his hands trembling slightly as the events of the evening replayed in his mind. A soft knock at the door broke his reverie.
"Come in," he called out, his voice hoarse.
Alfred, his loyal butler, entered the room. His face was etched with concern.
"Sir, are you all right?"
"Is there anything I can do?" James managed a weak smile.
"I'm fine, Alfred. Or at least, I will be. Thank you for your help tonight."
"I couldn't have pulled this off without you." Alfred nodded solemnly.
"Of course, sir."
"Though I must admit, I had my reservations about this plan. I never imagined it would end quite like this." "Neither did I, old friend," James sighed, taking a long sip of his drink. "Neither did I." As Alfred quietly excused himself, James sank into his leather armchair, closing his eyes. The peace was short-lived, however, as a commotion outside his study door caught his attention. "You can't go in there. Mr. Blackwood doesn't want to be disturbed." Alfred's voice rang out. "I don't care what he wants." Victoria's shrill voice cut through the air. "I'm still his fiancée, and I demand to speak with him." Before James could react, the door burst open. Victoria stood in the doorway, her perfect makeup now streaked with tears, her golden gown rumpled. "James," she said, her voice breaking. "Please let me explain. What happened out there? It wasn't me. You know me, James. You know I'm not that person." James stood up slowly, facing Victoria. "Do I?" he asked quietly. "Do I really know you, Victoria? Because the woman I saw tonight is not the woman I thought I was going to marry." Victoria stepped closer, reaching out to touch James' arm. He flinched away, causing her to recoil as if she'd been slapped. "James, please," she pleaded. "It was a misunderstanding. I was stressed about the party, about making everything perfect for us. I didn't mean to react that way. If I had known it was you." "That's exactly the point, Victoria," James interrupted, his voice firm. "You shouldn't need to know someone's identity to treat them with basic human decency. The way you treated me, the way you treat anyone you consider beneath you, it's unacceptable." Victoria's face crumpled.
"I can change, James. I promise. I'll do better.
"We can work through this together." James shook his head sadly. "I'm sorry, Victoria, but I don't think we can. What I saw tonight, it opened my eyes to who you really are. And it's not someone I can spend my life with." As Victoria began to sob, James' phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number. "I need to take this," he said, turning away from Victoria. "Please see yourself out." Victoria stood there for a moment, shock and disbelief etched across her face. Then, with a strangled cry, she turned and fled the room. James answered the phone, his voice weary.
"Hello."
"Mr. Blackwood?" A familiar voice came through the speaker.
"It's Sarah."
"The waitress from the party. I hope you don't mind, but I got your number from the catering company. I wanted to check if you were okay." James felt a warmth spread through his chest at Sarah's unexpected kindness. "Sarah," he said, his voice softening. I'm managing. Thank you for asking. And thank you for your kindness earlier. It meant more than you know." There was a pause on the other end of the line.
"Mr.
Blackwood, what you did tonight, it was brave.
And it was right.
I just wanted you to know that." James felt a lump form in his throat.
"Thank you, Sarah."
"That means a lot." As he ended the call, James walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. The night had been a disaster, but perhaps it was a necessary one. He had lost a fiancée, but he had gained something far more valuable: clarity. His phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. The story had already broken. "Millionaire exposes gold-digging fiancé at engagement party," the headline screamed. James sighed, knowing that the coming days would be filled with media scrutiny and public speculation. But as he stood there, watching the city below, he felt a strange sense of peace. The truth was out, painful as it was. And with that truth came the opportunity for a new beginning. As the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, James made a decision. He would use this experience, use his wealth and influence, to make a real difference in the world. No more shallow parties, no more superficial relationships. It was time for James Blackwood to discover what truly mattered in life. With renewed purpose, he turned away from the window, ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring. The morning after the disastrous engagement party, James Blackwood awoke to a world turned upside down. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, missed calls, and voicemails. The story had broken, and it was spreading like wildfire. James groaned, rubbing his temples as he scrolled through the headlines. Millionaire crashes own party as beggar, a social experiment gone wrong. Victoria Sinclair, victim or villain? Exclusive interview inside. Blackwood Industries stocks plummet amid CEO's bizarre behavior. A knock on his bedroom door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Alfred entered, his face grave. "Sir, I'm afraid the media presence outside has grown considerably. They're demanding a statement." James sighed heavily. "I suppose it was inevitable." "Prepare the car, Alfred. We'll face this head-on." As James dressed, he steeled himself for the onslaught that awaited him. The moment he stepped outside, camera flashes blinded him, and a cacophony of questions assaulted his ears. "Mr. Blackwood, was this a publicity stunt gone wrong?" "James, how do you respond to allegations of mental instability? Is it true that Victoria Sinclair is suing you for emotional distress?" James raised his hands, calling for silence. The crowd hushed, eager for his response. "Last night, I made a decision to test the character of those closest to me," James began, his voice steady. "While my methods may be questioned, my intentions were pure. I wanted to see beyond the facade of wealth and status, to find genuine compassion and kindness. What I discovered was disappointing, to say the least." As James spoke, a sleek black car pulled up behind the press corps. Victoria stepped out, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses, but her expression clearly one of fury. "Disappointing?" Victoria's shrill voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. "What's disappointing is a man who would humiliate his fiancée in front of the entire city. James Blackwood is nothing but a manipulative, unstable individual who clearly needs professional help." The reporters turned, cameras now trained on Victoria as she stormed towards James. "Victoria," James said calmly, "I think we both know the truth about what happened last night." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "The truth? The truth is that you set me up, James. You created an impossible situation and then judged me for failing your ridiculous test. Well, guess what? I'm not the one on trial here. You are." As the former couple's confrontation escalated, a small figure pushed through the crowd. It was Sarah, the waitress from the party, still dressed in her uniform from her morning shift. "Excuse me," Sarah called out, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "I have something to say." The reporters, sensing a new angle to the story, immediately turned their attention to Sarah. "Who are you?" one of them asked, shoving a microphone in her face. Sarah took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah Thompson. I was working at the party last night, and I saw everything that happened." Victoria's eyes narrowed behind her sunglasses. "This is ridiculous. Are we really going to listen to the help?" But Sarah pressed on, her voice growing stronger. "Mr. Blackwood may have made a mistake in his approach, but his intentions were good. I saw how people treated him when they thought he was homeless. It was cruel and inhumane. And Miss Sinclair," Sarah turned to face Victoria, "you were the worst of all." The crowd fell silent, hanging on Sarah's every word. "You didn't just ignore him or treat him poorly. You physically assaulted a man you thought was helpless and in need. If that's how you treat people when you think no one's watching, then I think Mr. Blackwood made the right choice in ending your engagement." Victoria's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? Do you have any idea who I am? I'll have your job for this." But her threats fell on deaf ears. The reporters were already firing questions at Sarah, captivated by this new perspective on the scandal. As the chaos unfolded, James' phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced down to see a message from his company's board of directors. "Emergency meeting called. Investors are panicking. Your presence is required immediately." James looked up from his phone, his mind racing. The personal fallout from his actions was one thing, but now his entire company was at risk. He had set out to test one relationship, but in doing so, he had jeopardized everything he had worked for. As he prepared to leave for the emergency board meeting, James caught Sarah's eye in the crowd. She gave him a small, encouraging nod, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the ever-watchful reporters. In that moment, surrounded by the media frenzy he had created, James realized that his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone around him. The true test, he now understood, was not last night's party, but how he would navigate the stormy waters ahead. With a deep breath, James straightened his tie and headed towards his car, ready to face whatever challenges awaited him. The story of James Blackwood and his fateful engagement party was far from over, and the whole world was watching to see what would happen next. A year had passed since the fateful night of James Blackwood's engagement party, and the world had changed dramatically for the once reclusive millionaire. The Blackwood Foundation for Compassionate Living had become a beacon of hope for the homeless and underprivileged in the city, gaining national recognition for its innovative approach to tackling systemic poverty. James stood at the podium, cameras flashing as he accepted the Humanitarian of the Year award. His appearance had changed. Gone was the perfectly tailored suit, replaced by a more casual, approachable style. His eyes, once guarded, now shone with purpose and warmth. "Thank you all," James began, his voice steady and sincere. "This award isn't just for me. It's for every person who's shown kindness to a stranger, who's looked beyond appearances to see the humanity in others." As he spoke, his gaze found Sarah in the audience. She smiled encouragingly, her presence a constant reminder of the kindness that had changed his life. After the ceremony, James and Sarah walked through the Foundation's newest project, a community center that provided job training, healthcare, and housing assistance to those in need. "I still can't believe how far we've come," Sarah mused, looking around at the bustling activity. "Remember when this was just an idea scribbled on a napkin?" James chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "I remember. And I remember thinking you were crazy for believing in me after everything that happened." Sarah playfully nudged his shoulder. "Not crazy. Just able to see the real you, even when you were covered in fake dirt and champagne." Their comfortable banter was interrupted by James' assistant, looking flustered. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Ms. Sinclair is here. She's insisting on speaking with you." James and Sarah exchanged surprised glances. Victoria hadn't been seen in public since the scandal broke, retreating to Europe to escape the media frenzy. "I'll handle this," James said quietly to Sarah. "Why don't you check on the new literacy program?" Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand supportively before walking away. James found Victoria waiting in the reception area, looking as polished and beautiful as ever, but with a nervousness that was new to her demeanor. "Victoria," James greeted her, his tone neutral. "This is unexpected." Victoria stood, smoothing her designer dress.
James
"I've been doing a lot of thinking. About that night, about everything." James gestured for her to sit, taking a seat across from her. "And what conclusions have you come to?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I was wrong, James. So terribly wrong. Not just that night, but in how I lived my entire life. Seeing what you've done with the foundation, how you've changed. I want to make amends." James studied her carefully, searching for any sign of insincerity. "And how do you propose to do that?" "I want to help," Victoria said earnestly. "I've set up my own charitable foundation in Europe. I thought perhaps we could collaborate, share resources."
For a moment, James was tempted.
The idea of redemption, of second chances, was at the core of his foundation's work. But as he looked at Victoria, he realized something important. "Victoria," he said gently, "I appreciate your offer, and I'm glad you found a new purpose. But I think it's best if we continue on separate paths." Victoria's face fell. "But James, I've changed. I'm not the same person I was." James held up a hand, stopping her. "I believe you've changed, Victoria. But so have I. We're different people now, with different goals and values. The best thing we can do is to pursue those goals independently." Tears welled up in Victoria's eyes, but she nodded, understanding. "I suppose you're right. I wanted you to know how sorry I am. For everything." James stood, offering her a kind smile.
"Thank you, Victoria.
"I wish you the best with your foundation.
Who knows?
Maybe one day, our paths will cross again in a more positive way." As Victoria left, Sarah reappeared, concern etched on her face. "Everything okay?" James nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Yes, actually. I think that was the closure we both needed." Later that evening, as James and Sarah were leaving the community center, they ran into a familiar face, the homeless veteran James had met during his undercover stint on the streets. "Mr. Blackwood." The man called out, his face beaming. "I did it. I got the job at the factory, just like you said I could." James grinned, clasping the man's hand warmly. That's fantastic news, Tom. I knew you had it in you. Tom's eyes shone with pride and gratitude. It's all thanks to you and Miss Sarah here. This foundation, it's changing lives. Real lives. As they said their goodbyes to Tom, Sarah slipped her hand into James. You know, she said softly, when I snuck you into that party a year ago, I never imagined this is where we'd end up. James looked at her, his heart full. Neither did I. But I'm grateful every day that you saw something in that scruffy beggar worth saving. As they walked out into the cool evening air, the city lights twinkling around them, James felt a sense of peace he'd never known before. He had lost a fiancée and his old way of life, but he had gained something far more valuable, a purpose, a partner, and a chance to make a real difference in the world. The night that had started as a test of one woman's character had become a transformative journey, not just for James, but for countless others whose lives the foundation touched. And as he looked to the future, hand in hand with Sarah, James knew that the greatest chapters of his story were still to come. 1 year had passed since the fateful night that changed James Blackwood's life forever. The Blackwood Foundation for Compassionate Living had become a beacon of hope in the city, transforming the lives of countless individuals struggling with homelessness and poverty. Tonight, James was hosting another gala, but this time, the purpose was entirely different. The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Mansion was once again filled with people, but the crowd was unlike any that had gathered there before. Celebrities rubbed shoulders with former homeless individuals who had found their footing through the Foundation's programs. Business tycoons engaged in animated conversations with social workers and community leaders. It was a testament to James' vision of breaking down social barriers and fostering genuine human connections. Sarah, now the Foundation's executive director, stood at the entrance, greeting guests with a warm smile. Her eyes constantly scanned the room, looking for one particular face. "Excuse me," a gruff voice said behind her. "Is this where the fancy party's happening?" Sarah turned to find herself face to face with a disheveled man in tattered clothes. For a moment, her heart skipped a beat, memories of that night a year ago flooding back. Then, she noticed the familiar twinkle in the man's eyes. A knowing smile spread across her face. "James Blackwood, you old rascal. I can't believe you're doing this again." James grinned, his disguise impeccable once more. "Well, my dear, I thought it fitting to come full circle. Besides, I want to make sure everyone is truly treated equally at this event." Sarah shook her head in amusement. "You never cease to amaze me. Go on then, mingle. But don't cause too much trouble this time." As James made his way through the crowd, he was struck by the stark difference from the last time he had done this. Instead of disgust and disdain, he was met with smiles and inclusive gestures. People engaged him in conversation, genuinely interested in his story and perspective. Near the champagne fountain, a deliberate callback to that fateful night, James encountered Tom, the homeless veteran he had met during his undercover stint on the streets. "Mr. James," Tom exclaimed, his face beaming. "I almost didn't recognize you in that getup. Bringing back old memories, are we?" James chuckled, clasping Tom's hand warmly. "Indeed we are, my friend. How are things at the factory?" Tom's chest swelled with pride. "Couldn't be better, sir. I've even been promoted to shift supervisor. And it's all thanks to you and Miss Sarah." As they chatted, a commotion near the entrance caught their attention. Victoria Sinclair, James' former fiancée, had arrived, looking as glamorous as ever. James tensed, unsure of how to handle this unexpected development. But before he could decide on a course of action, he saw Sarah intercepting Victoria with grace and poise. "Miss Sinclair," Sarah greeted her cordially. "This is certainly a surprise. I wasn't aware you were on the guest list." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "I came to make a donation to the foundation. And perhaps to make amends." Sarah raised an eyebrow but maintained her composure. "That's very generous of you. Why don't we talk more about this in private?" As Sarah led Victoria away, James couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed in a year. The woman he had once thought he loved now seemed like a stranger, while Sarah, who had shown him kindness when he appeared to have nothing, had become the most important person in his life. The evening progressed, filled with heartwarming stories of lives changed and communities uplifted. James, still in his disguise, found himself in conversation with a young entrepreneur who had grown up in the foster care system. "You know," the young man said, his eyes shining with admiration, "what Mr. Blackwood did, it was more than just giving money. He showed us that we matter, that our stories matter. It's changed everything." James felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm sure Mr. Blackwood would be honored to hear that," he managed to say. As the gala neared its end, James made his way to the small stage set up at one end of the ballroom. He caught Sarah's eye in the crowd, and she nodded encouragingly, immediately recognizing his intention. James cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the room. Slowly, deliberately, he began to remove his disguise, revealing his true identity to the astonished crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice clear and strong. "A year ago, I stood in this very room, hidden behind a similar disguise, and learned painful but necessary truths about myself and the world around me." A hush fell over the crowd as James continued. "Tonight, I wanted to come full circle, to see how much has changed. And I am overwhelmed by the kindness, the compassion, and the genuine human connections I've witnessed here." He paused, his eyes finding Sarah in the crowd. "We've made progress, but our work is far from over. Let this night remind us that every person, regardless of their appearance or circumstances, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect." As applause filled the room, James stepped down from the stage. Sarah made her way to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You never cease to amaze me, James Blackwood," she said softly, taking his hand. James smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "I had an excellent teacher in the art of kindness." As they stood together, looking out at the diverse crowd of people whose lives had been touched by their work, James felt a sense of peace he had never known before. The journey that had begun with a test of one woman's character had become a transformative experience, not just for him, but for countless others. And as he looked to the future, hand in hand with Sarah, James knew that the greatest chapters of his story, their story, were still to come.